सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। Let's try chanting together. अर्जुन उवाच एवं सततयुक्ताये भक्तास्त्वां पर्युपासते ये चाभ्यक्षरमव्यक्तं तेषां के योगवित्तमाः। श्रीभगवानुवाच मय्यावेश्य मनो ये मां नित्ययुक्ता उपासते श्रद्धया परयोपेताः ते मे युक्ततमा मताः। ये त्वक्षरमनिर्देश्यम् अव्यक्तं पर्युपासते सर्वत्र गमचिन्त्यं च कूटस्थमचलं ध्रुवम् सन्नियम्येन्द्रियग्रामं सर्वत्र समबुद्धयः ते प्राप्नुवन्ति मामेव सर्वभूतहिते रताः। So the comparison between the jnani and the karma yogi is not correct. Why? Because one symbolizes the end. What is the end? Who symbolizes the end? The jnani symbolizes the end. The karma yoga is the means, not even the direct means, the auxiliary means to gain the end. So here, even though Arjuna's question is spurred from a place of confusion, self-confusion, and he is just wanting to quickly get there, anyhow, somehow, right now, who can blame him? Everybody feels that way. What is the quick fix we want? Whether it's physical pain, you want some cream, some balm that will take it away right now, and whether it's emotional pain, or the disease is that of samsara. In fact, samsara is a chronic disease based upon which all chronic diseases are there. Yeah, that is why in Sanskrit it is called Bhavaroga, and the knowledge of Bhagavan is the Vaidya. Vaidya means what? Doctor. Yeah. So, when you say, it's not enough to say I'm a physician, I'm a doctor. Then people will ask, what specialty? Are you an optometrist, ophthalmologist? Are you a podiatrist? Are you an internist? Like this, there will be so many specialties. And if you ask, and Bhagavan says, I am the doctor. And then you ask Bhagavan, what is your specialty? Samsara. Bhavaroga Nivaraka, the one who cures without a trace the disease of samsara. That is why I like that song very much. What is that song? Mera Ved Guru Govinda. Yes, my doctor. Everybody has their favorite doctor. My Ishta doctor, instead of Ishta Devata, we are making Ishta doctor, is none other than Govinda, who is the Guru, or you can take Guru Gobind Singh, doesn't matter. And what does he do? He gives the medicine. He puts the medicine on my tongue. And what is that medicine? Hari Nama Japa. That is the medicine. The meditation upon the Lord is the pill that I have to swallow. And it's very apt to quote this here in this chapter, because this is the chapter on bhakti and meditation and all those things. So this is Bhagavan, and this Bhagavan puts the japa on my tongue, and the Guru, or you can take the Guru, gives the upadesha of the mantra, puts it on my tongue, repeating which, Kate Janamaka Fanda. means all this cycle of birth is completely, the samsara is gone. Papa punya gone, fear gone, sadness gone, all klesha, all this feeling of what's happening inside and all this frustration, why nothing works and why this knowledge also doesn't work and what's going on, gone. This is the ultimate medicine. Bhavaroga bhaishaka, bhishaka, bhaishajam we say. Bhaishaja, bhishaka, same thing. Bhishak means doctor. And so here, so samsara is a big, what's the word for it? It's the sea, it's an ocean, and it's an ocean, what did I tell you? Which is mainly an ocean. Yeah. An oceanic notion. This is samsara. A huge notion, a collection of errors with all kinds of doubts and despair. This is samsara. And here, the point is not the what to do to get out of samsara. Since samsara is an oceanic notion, not an ocean. So what do I have to do? I have to dispel the notion. And the dispelling of the notion is through self-knowledge. And if that self-knowledge is not forthcoming, because like we said in the last class, if I am in contact with the proper means of knowledge, such as the eyes, and this flower is placed in front of me, I should be able to see the flower. If I am not seeing the flower, either there is something wrong. I have to, some grit in the eye, I have to clean out the vision, wash out the eyes, that is basically what is there. So if we are talking of the knowledge of oneself as total, and if that is there, if that is not going in what? In the mind. And if that's not going in, the mind is already filled up with all kinds of notions. There is no room. You have to make a little clearing, little pruning, some jungle, cutting, and ragadvesha pruning is required for there to be space. So you see, the karma yoga is basically this ragadvesha pruning. That's all it is. And so if it is this ragadvesha pruning, then we are not worried about it, because then the pruning is needed for the knowledge to sink in. So one is the means, and the knowledge itself is the end, which shows you, which removes the ocean of samsara, because the ocean is just a notion. So, which I start to think is real. That's the problem. And so therefore, the jnani and the karma yogi cannot be compared. One symbolizes the end, which is the knowledge. The one abiding in the knowledge is called jnani, and the karma yogi is the one still doing the cutting of the jungle. Which jungle? Inner jungle, And so bypassing that question of how to get there quickly, like, Arjuna's question is like, what, after 10th grade can I do my PhD? This is what Arjuna's question is like. And Bhagavan brings him down several notches by saying, let's leave the jnanis out of this discussion. Let us talk about the karma yogi here, and see and look at the various kinds of, karma yoga, and look at the various ways in which karma yoga can be accomplished. And that is what we saw. And then, so that was verse number 2, is that the people should be, they should have a kind of worship. They should have worship in their daily life. And what kind of worship? Looking upon Bhagavan as the doer, that kind of worship. Ascribing their own doership to Bhagavan, which is really karma yoga, and doing everything with devotion and happiness, rather than complaining. Complaints also have a place, but this is what was talked about last time. And then he talks about the jnani. And ye tu. On the other hand, those, and who are those people? Aksharam anirdeshyam avyaktam sarvatragam achintyam kutastham pariupasate. So those who look upon, what do they look upon? They look upon the formless, the nameless, as the truth of Bhagavan, as the truth of themselves, as the truth of everything. So they have graduated from needing a particular form to contemplating upon their own nature as that formless truth, the Adhara, the foundation of this entire universe. They are able to do that. And how do they contemplate was given. We saw each of those words that describe Brahman, except the last one, which is Dhruvam. Kutastham, we saw two meanings. What is Kutastham?
Anvil.
Yeah, one is the anvil. It is as stationary as an anvil which cannot be moved. And then the one which does not, which lives in Maya without coming, which wields Maya without coming under the spell of Maya. Very beautiful. And then Dhruvam we haven't seen. That is which is unchanging. So today you look upon it. What is it like? Satyam Jnanam Anantam Kutastham. Yesterday what was it? Satyam Jnanam Anantam. Tomorrow what will it be? Same thing. So the unchanging one, and that is why the pole star, which is in the north, which gives the idea of the northern direction, no matter where one is called Dhruva, because it is fixed. It is called Dhruva. So that which is always the same, they contemplate upon that. Alright, easy enough. But who are these people who contemplate upon that? I told you there are several words that describe Brahman in these two verses. And then there are several words that describe the meditators of Brahman, correct? And let us look at those three adjectives that describe not really meditators, the contemplators of Brahman in a formless way. Because this was really Arjuna's question, is formed better or formless better? And so he says, who are these people? Sanniyamya Indriya Gramam, one adjective. Sarvatra Samabuddhayah, second adjective. And the third adjective comes at the very end. Sarva Bhuta Hite Rataha. So three adjectives. So who are these people? These people are the ones who are able to have the mastery over their senses. Very important. Sanniyamya Indriya Gramam. Samyak Niyamya. Sam plus Niyamya, Sanniyamya. And so what do the Niyamya? Niyamya means having brought it in under their mastery. The sense organs. Indriya Gramam, the group of organs. And when you say Gramam, group, that means the sense organs and the organs of action. And this morning what did we see? Shama and Dama. The ones who have Shama Dama, who are equipped with a non-reactive and a resolved and a quiet mind, which is free of agitation, free of worry, free of disturbance, free of anxiety about the future, free of regrets connected to the past. This is a quietened mind. So in this mind there is no plotting about what to do in the future. There is no plotting against the Jagat or the people in the Jagat. How do I, get a certain kind of a one-upmanship? It is not there. And in this kind of a mind, which is so quiet, there is no anxiety about the future, neither is there regret about the past. This is the kind of a mind where there is some niyama, a certain kind of a quietude is there, and the thoughts that arise come from the deep place of a union with the cosmic will. There is no individual will anymore. The individual will just drops. Because really, we keep talking about the will, but most of the time it says won't. What is the use of such a will that keeps saying I won't, I can't, I don't. So here, this is a will that is surrendered to the cosmic will, or rather we should say the individual will, because of its own growth and maturity, has embraced its identity as the cosmic will, has grown into embodying the cosmic will. And such a person is known as Satya Sankalpa. Whatever they desire happens. Whatever they decide happens. And I have seen this with Pujya Swamiji. He will just think of a person, wonder where that person is, and 2 minutes later that person will walk in and hasn't come to the ashram for 10 years. Like that. So this is an example of that, Satya Sankalpa, because there are no individual desires and one is always with the flow. And when you go with the flow for a length of time, you really become the flow. You are non-separate from the flow. It's actually a very beautiful thing. So it's not that there is no sense of deprivation. Oh, I used to have some individual sankalpas, now I have given them up, now I have become, I have sanniyama and I have given up all these things. There is no giving up. In fact, you have embraced the whole thing. And Confucius also talks about this in his works. He says that the person who is one with the universe has the universe spinning in the hand. I mean, metaphor. It's not about some kind of a power-hungry thing. It is when you don't want something that it comes. You think about it. Whatever you don't want comes. Whatever you want doesn't come. It's the law of nature. And so therefore, the sannyasi here, the jnani, has given up the group of desires that make the mind agitated. Certain desires which don't make the mind agitated are most welcome to be retained. They are not causing a problem. But we are talking about those binding desires and anxieties that make the mind agitated. Desires include fears, raga and dvesha. And so for the sannyasi, they have been reduced, suspended, put aside. They are not coming into play in the everyday for the jnani. And instead the jnani enjoys a deep quietude which becomes the wellspring for thoughts which are good for the universe. And that's why so many people come and say, please pray for me, please help me with this. And why should you ask somebody else to pray for you? Aren't you capable of praying for yourself? Yes, but the feeling is, such a person who doesn't have desire for themselves, their prayer will be more effective on my behalf. It's more of a selfless prayer, like that. So to speak. And so therefore, that is the whole idea here. Sanniyamya indriya gramam. So this is the sense organs including the mind. And then we have also the organs of action. The organs of action are also conserved. Most notably, the speech. You find that as you mature, more and more, there is less and less to say. What will you say? How is the weather? Okay, it's hot. Tomorrow how it will be? It's hotter. Today 92, tomorrow 94. Okay, what else is there to discuss? No, I have so many things to share. What is it that you are trying to share? No, I want to talk about my whole day. So what is it that you want to talk about your whole day? All these things happen, a series of events. Really? Are you talking about the events? No, I'm not talking of the events. The events I don't care about. But I want to share how the events impact me, how these events in the day impacted me. I want to share with you. That is the whole idea. And then you say, okay, so what is it that you are really wanting to talk about? I want to talk about how I have been impacted. Meaning the status of oneself as a victim. Correct? Which is what? Bhokta. Why me? Why this happened to me? Or the karta. You know what I did today? I did this, I did that, and then I did that, and I did everything so well. Karta. And both of those, as we have seen in several classes, not just this one, that both of those are recipes for greater and greater feeling of bondage. The more I identify as the doer, the greater my identification as the victim, I am just putting the bars, I am putting new bars on this cage of samsara. The cage of samsara already has a few bars, which is ignorance, which is comprising ignorance, but then on top of those bars, I put even more bars. Now those bars may have been vertical, I put now horizontal bars of do-worship and experiencership. So this is where the speech resides. The speech has a commitment to either patting itself, patting the ahankara on the back to see wonderful job it did and what a great day it had, or it complains endlessly, in which case it feels like a victim. So the speech, that is what most of our talk is about that. Okay, if we are not complaining and not identifying as karta bhokta, what are we talking about? We are only talking about 4 things. We are talking of nouns, right? Speech can describe nouns. And then we are talking of adjectives. Tall, short, beautiful, ugly, fat, thin, these are the adjectives. And nouns are tree, house, all these things are nouns. Then we talk of verbs. Speech can cover the verbs, the whole world of verbs: runs, sits, stands, eats, drinks, sleeps. And then finally relationships. What is relationships? Mine, not yet mine. This is what his, hers, its, a sense of belonging. This is all that is covered by speech, and this is anatma or atma? No. Anatma. This is not I, not I, not I, not I. So much of the daily life, think about it. One is spent talking about the not I, living in the realm of the not I. And true enough, the not I, there is really ultimately no such thing as not I. The not I resolves into I. But until I know that, the not I is separate in my own understanding. So whole anatma, 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 I revel in the world of anatma. Suddenly I have a pang of regret. I really want to talk of atma. What should I do, And so here, for the jnani, the speech is very measured. There is nothing much to talk about. If they are not talking about atma or Brahman, what else is there to talk about? A child asked me once, I've heard you talk of atma and I've heard you talk of Brahman. Do you talk of other things too? Because in the class, this is what, the child heard. And so that is basically sanniyamya indriya gramam. So speech, hands and legs, all these things, there is a certain measured way of being. The presence of the person is measured. So that such a person is called sanniyamya indriya gramam, the one who, after having mastered the sense organs and the organs of action, what does what do they do? Sarvatra samabuddhayaha. First take samabuddhayaha. Samabuddhihi. Yasya samabuddhihi yasya samabuddhayaha. Samabuddhaya means having an orientation, outlook of equanimity. Meaning everybody is the same. It's not that, you brought me a chocolate yesterday, so you are more dear to me than the other person who always brings, health food. No, that is not the idea. So samabuddhaya means 2 things. One is the same orientation towards all people and the same kind of orientation at all times. Same kind of orientations at all times. Sarvatra, in every situation. And how many people can say that? I have samabuddhi in every situation. Can we say that? No. Morning goes well, afternoon something happens. A personal rain cloud comes and settles right above the top of the head. And then for no reason the person becomes sad. Then evening again the person is okay. The next day what? Always. You ask anybody, how are you? They will make a sign. When I first came into this country, I said, what is this sign? Are they falling off a precipice or what? Then now I know that that is correct. It's a feeling of always standing on the edge, neither falling this side nor falling that side. It's this precarious, dangling situation. So, sarvatra samabuddhayaha, the ones who are free of ups and downs. Yo-yo, you know, the yo-yo mentality is not there. And here a doubt can arise. And what is that doubt? The doubt that can arise is that it is just like, you know, when someone has no brain activity in the hospital, there is a flat line, correct? Yeah, they have hooked up the brain to see if there is any activity, and the breathing is there, but there is no brain activity. This is the time the doctor assembles the relatives, the ones who are in charge of making decisions, to say, shall we, you know, disconnect the support, all the other life support system to keep this person alive, but even this person comes out of the coma, if the chances are very little, and even if they do come out, they will have, you know, they are severely brain damaged and they will have no quality of life. So here samabuddhi means flat line, this doubt can come. And in fact, a lot of people, one of the contentions is that I don't want to become enlightened because then I'll be always the same and it's boring. I don't want moksha because I enjoy the ups and downs in my life, you know. I enjoy, you know, having a fight. I enjoy a good conflict. I enjoy some nice meaty arguments. I enjoy all these things. And here you are taking away my lifeline, you know. So for them, what to say? You know, first of all, to enjoy conflict, there is something wrong, right? So that means that there is a previous association, either in this life, in the childhood, or in other lives, as that conflict is the one that produces attention and love. So in other words, the person becomes a drama king, a drama queen, because that is what is giving the attention. And the the conflictual people are also like that. In many families, they think that, you know, if you scold somebody, you love them, or if you have a big fight, that's an expression of love. So therefore, growing up in such families, the child starts to think that without conflict there is no love, without conflict there is no excitement, without conflict there is no point in living. But that is again a notion, a very strong psychological notion that has to be pruned through karma yoga, that has to be pruned. And here the sannyasi or the jnani does not have that kind of a feeling. So there is no reason for drama. You know, you don't create a low point so that you can then enjoy a high point. And neither do you create a big hype so that then you can really rest. That's what a 2-year-old does. When it's tired and you say, you are tired, let me put you to bed, what will it say? No, I'm not tired. Go away. You know, this is what. At 2, it is cute. Yeah, but more than 2, it is not cute. At 2, the mother can laugh, the father can laugh and say, look at this child, it doesn't realize how tired it is. After that, it becomes very annoying. At 22, if you do it, it's severely annoying. It is AGM, attention getting mechanism. That's what it is. It's a displaced, need. This is what is called a displaced need. The need is to rest. But because the mind is so agitated, you cannot make yourself rest. So you create a big drama to expend all your energies and anxieties so that you will just fall completely to the ground asleep. This is what it is. This is not the best way of overcoming insomnia, okay? Yeah, it's very difficult. And so, this high and low are not just the natural tendencies in life. The high and low, for the most part, are human creations because of certain psychological errors and certain psychological impressions from childhood. Really. So one feels that one has to somehow, because one is so disconnected from oneself most of the time, that you have to create this big drama to know that you exist. And that is why this whole culture of extreme piercing has come about. Tattoo and piercing, this ink culture. And then you have, and sometimes these people, you have to find at 1 square inch of skin without tattoo. And this is very painful. It's not easy, I've heard, to get this tattoo. It's very painful. And you ask these people, there is one film, I forgot its title. I saw, it's a documentary on the people who are into this extreme tattooing and piercing. And some of the artists, tattoo artists, were interviewed, as were the people who were getting the tattoos in this parlor, in this piercing cum tattoo parlor. And the people said, this is the only way I know I'm alive. Namaha, that's all we have to say. Namaha means what else do you do but surrender to Bhagavan when people say this. And then the tattoo also is a sign, when if it is hurting, then I'm alive. Like sometimes you say, I need to pinch myself, am I really alive? This is an extreme form of that all the time because of certain childhood traumas. The alienation and the disconnection from one's own body, mind, sense complex is so complete, so total and so pervasive that in order to bring the body back, they have to subject it to trauma and pain. So this becomes the metaphor for what I am talking about. And the total opposite of someone who has mastery over the group of sense organs and over themselves. That mastery is not got by running away. That mastery is gained through a long period of dealing with the past, of transcending the hurts and pains through this knowledge, through the inner work, and then there is that mastery. It's by no means of flat line. It's not that the jnani is just sitting and you go and tell the jnani a joke and the jnani says, oh, I have to have self-mastery, so I should be the same. So how was I before I heard the joke? I was like this. So after I hear the joke, I will be like this. That is not the point. You can enjoy, you can express, it's not that. But the idea is nothing takes you out of orbit and then you don't have to crash back into the system, and crash into the sound barrier to come back into orbit. Nothing decenters you. And this is gradually, this process is gained, And so this is sanniyama of indriya gramam. And then sarvatra samabuddhayaha, both are related. Because there is mastery of sense organs of action by extension, there is sarvatra samabuddhihi. So samabuddhi, the equanimity is directly the gain of the equanimity in all situations, at all times, in all places, is a direct prasada, a direct result of indriya grama nigrahaha. It is the direct result of the mastery of the sense organs. And then what? So as a result, the third one is what? Sarva bhuta hite rataha. So as a result of these two, the final consequence is that they always live for the good of others because they have nothing to achieve. Sarva bhuta, all beings, hite means, hita means comfort, benefit, rataha means whose delight, ratihi, whose delight is always in the well-being of all beings, in the wellness of all beings. Now this is easier said than done. How to become a person who is always, committed to the well-being of all beings? Here barely I can make my own well-being, I can be barely in charge of my own well-being. In the beginning the person tries to farm out their own well-being to that of the significant other. That's why many people get married. Take care of me. They will say that. And this is why sometimes people have children also, in the hope that they'll grow up and take care of me. That is the whole idea. Some extension of myself that I leave behind so that it can take care of me. But very soon when one is introduced to this knowledge, the truth of which makes you appreciate the fact that all that there is here is you only. Everything that is around you is just an extension of yourself. And all that is here is one self, and that happens to be you. One Bhagavan, one whole. That is as though manifest as the Jagat. It's all you only. The conscious being who is looking at the Jagat is the whole. That is you. And then what? What are you going to depend on? Right? So what are you going to depend on? And so the Jnani here becomes a rare example in the sense that very effortlessly. It's not that the Jnani is getting burnt out, because this is another, fear we have. If I give too much, I will get burnt out. So if the Jnani is all the time thinking of the well-being of others, the Jnani must be burning the candle at both the ends and in the middle also. The Jnani must be a sad fellow, very burnt out, no, energy. That's not the idea. So here, the Jnani's being is effortless, because it's an outcome of knowledge that all that is here is myself alone. And since there is no enmity with anything, nothing is inimical to the Jnani. It's impossible to argue with the Jnani. You can't argue. One time I was witness to this very interesting situation with my teacher, Swamiji, Pujya Swamiji. And one man came, nobody knew who he was. Swamiji was sitting there. This man came and said, I want to argue with you. Those were his first words. He didn't say namaste, he didn't say pranam, he didn't say how are you doing, he didn't say my name is so and so, I have come from here. No introduction, nothing. He just said, I want to have a really good argument with you. I don't like what you say. Then I am going to prove that you are wrong, and I am going to argue with you. And what was Swamiji's reaction? He just looked, he was reading something. He just looked towards the kitchen, and whoever was managing the kitchen looked back and said, what is it that you need? And Swamiji said, make him a cup of tea. So the cup of tea was brought. Swamiji went on to read whatever he was reading and editing. And the man had the cup of tea and quietly left and went, and nobody saw him ever again. What happened? Nobody knows. Some agitation was there, it was resolved. That's how it is. And so like this, there is no argument, because there is no truck with the universe. All that there is one, is one whole. And living in that understanding, no one is separate from you. And if you are able to help, you help. If you are not able to help, you say a prayer which is a help again. If you are able to directly help or indirectly put the person in contact with somebody else, you do that. But again, it is free of a sense of desperation, the help here. Because most of the help that one gives in a situation is to really to help oneself. And this is very evident when we have some natural calamities or national calamities. We have tornadoes, earthquakes, all over the world so many things are happening. And then you hear of people trapped in the earthquake and being rescued, and people just losing limbs, and terrorist attacks, whatever they might be. And then what happens? Immediately there is an outpouring of empathy. You want to send toys, you want to send money, you want to send clothes. Not that any of this is bad, but then what is the impetus for sending that? Is that empathy purely empathy, or is that empathy an outward expression of self-sympathy? That's what we have to see. Because whenever I cry, in response to somebody else's tears, I cannot stand somebody else crying. there is a greater need here, to assuage which I am acting out of that need. So every social worker works from partly the intention of helping, but partly also a feeling of I can't stand it, I have to do something. A feeling of desperation coming from one's own inner spiritual, emotional hunger and neglect, which is a huge thing. And sometimes the seva helps, because of the seva what happens is that inner child is also taken care of, but not always it happens. Sometimes one is very passionate about helping the other as a mode of distraction of not taking care of oneself, because it's comfortable to be focused outward. So one has to see what is happening. But for the jnani, who is sarva bhuta hiterataha, who is committed all the time to the well-being of the whole universe, it's an effortless way of being, and it's not a way of being that is fraught with inner pressure. So there is in many ways it differs. There is no inner pressure or inner aches and sorrows that the jnani is trying to quell, and to make up for that the jnani is doing dana, charity, or doing some help. No. So there is no inner pain. That is one way this kind of a well-being is different. The second way is there is no particular effort involved. Although the jnani may himself or herself distribute food or clothes or whatever, there is no intentional effort involved. In fact, the intention itself becomes the effort. The intention is so strong on behalf of all the people that the intention, thoughts have power. We have to never forget that. Thoughts have power, and the power of the thoughts are invisible. And those thoughts go, because the thoughts are in alignment with the whole, those thoughts go into various minds, and those minds start to, act in those bodies. So the jnani remains free of action, has a thought, and the people take that thought and run, because it is in their interest, and it is in the interests of people much more than them. And so everybody benefits. It's an effortless way of being. And they say that when the Buddha meditated, he was meditating in a forest, and they observed that for 100-mile radius, nothing was sick, nothing was wanting, nothing was unwell, nothing died. What did he do? Did he say that, oh, I'm cleaning up the air, around my meditation quarters? No, he was just simply sitting, probably in a hut or under the tree, even more. But this is documented, that nothing was sick, and whoever came in this radius immediately had a sense of well-being. It was their own well-being, but they were able to sense it better in that radius. What a beautiful story. So that is what is sarva bhuta hite rataha. The people who are incapable of having ill thoughts against even those that hurt them. That is the idea. That is the second meaning of sarva bhuta hite rataha. If you go and hurt the jnani is not going to say, wait till they come in front of me next time, wait to see what I'm going to do. Those thoughts are just totally absent. And the one who does not give in to an argument, if the person starts to argue, the jnani just becomes quiet or walks away. That's all it is. And so therefore, there is no back and forth, there is nothing. Everybody is him or her alone for the jnani. They are non-separate from that, and from that place of non-separation, they move, and their thoughts and actions are therefore always in keeping with dharma. Somebody asked the question earlier, does the jnani transcend dharma? I said yes, but not in the way we think of the word transcendence. Transcend dharma means, you are one with dharma already, and you don't need dharma as a as a guiding post for your actions. You become a person who is incapable of transgressing dharma. So sarva bhuta hite rataha. So why are these three qualifications of the person given, and why are so many qualifications of Brahman given? Brahman, which is not an object of thought, not an object of words, is the truth of everything, is beyond Maya, is fixed, unchanging. This is meditated upon by, contemplated upon by what? By these kinds of people. Meaning, there is a direct relationship between who can visualize and contemplate upon Brahman directly without the need for forms and names, and who cannot. So here, talking about the Jnani, Bhagavan Krishna says that this is the level of internal and emotional maturity that it is going to take to transcend the need for form in one's worship or meditation. And in fact, Brahman is not an object of meditation. One meditates upon the subject itself. One contemplates is a better word to use. So you see, this is not coming in a hurry. This is going to take time to have the mastery over the group of sense organs. That itself takes many, many lifetimes. Why? Because monkey buddhi persists. Even though monkey life was several lifetimes ago, the mind jumps from thought to thought like the monkey from tree to tree. Monkey buddhi persists. So it's very difficult to calm down the mind. One finds that, and it is not easy to have a certain not easy to have sama buddhi at all times, because the mind gets reactive. Even if you don't want to get reactive, the mind becomes reactive. There is not enough there's not enough space between oneself and the mind to be able to witness the mind and tell it, all right, calm down, it's okay, nothing is happening to you, and you are all right. So only when there is that leisure and inner space, one can observe the mind and allow it to calm down. But that is not there. And so therefore what? Therefore we have the, and also therefore the last one is also not there. The one who effortlessly intends the well-being of all at all times. Usually one lives for oneself. And so you see that there is a divide of a Grand Canyon between the people who contemplate upon Brahman as Akshara, as the unchanging one which is formless, and the rest of the people. There is a big difference. So therefore Bhagavan says, don't try to be like them. Oh, what will happen if I am like them? Let us read, because the answer is given in the next verse. What will happen if I also, if I am not Samabuddhi, and if I am not Sanniyamya, I have not done some niyama of the indriyas, and if I am not Sarva Bhuta Hite Rata, even if I am not all those, can I not contemplate like that? Well, the short answer is no. Let us see what he says. Kleshodhikatarastesham avyaktasaktachetasam kleshodhikatarastesham not tesham, tesham. Kleshodhikatarastesham avyaktasaktachetasam avyakta hi gatir dukham dehavadbhiravapsyase avapyate देहवद्भिरवाप्यते. One more time. क्लेशोऽधिकतरस्तेषाम् अव्यक्तासक्तचेतसाम् अव्यक्ता हि गतिर्दुःखम् देहवद्भिरवाप्यते. Kleshaha means affliction. Adhikataraha means even greater. Even greater is the affliction. Tesham, for them, for those. Who are these people? Avyakta sakta chetasam, whose hearts are given away who have an obsession for the formless. Who say, I can't deal with forms. I want to go straight. Where is the ladder to formlessness? You know, what is all these forms? Why do we need all these forms? And these are the people who will ask frequently the question, why do we have to worship Bhagavan in a form? Why not worship Bhagavan as formless? Why do I need to go to temple? If I am Brahman, this is a frequent question, and I am sure some people already have thought of asking me that. So let me ask it. If I am already Brahman, why should I go to temple? Why should I do puja? Why should I do any rituals? Because I am into Nirgun, Nirakar. The formless and the attributeless, that is what attracts. I want to worship the formless. How are you going to worship the formless? Tell me. So here Bhagavan has a very nice word for them. Avyakta asakta chetasam. Asakti is obsession. Yeah. Asakti is obsession. From Sangha to be involved with, to join. Saktihi. Asakti asamantat sangaha asaktihi. So the total obsession, totally obsessed with what? The formless. Avyakta, the unmanifest, the formless, chetasam, those whose hearts are totally committed, or rather they are obsessed with the formless. In fact, they have a slight rash when you talk of Bhagavan in the form of forms. They say, what is this? I can't relate to this. What are you trying to do to me? I just want attributeless, formless. That sounds good, This is something to look into. And the wordings are very nice. Greater is their affliction. Greater is the affliction for those who seek the formless. Not seek the formless. Who seek to and who are obsessive in trying to worship the formless. Worship itself is a form. Yeah. So then, avyaktahi gatihi dukkham. So for such people, it is very difficult. Dukkham means very difficult to relate to themselves as the formless, attributeless Brahman when they cannot even handle the forms that are there. Very difficult. Avyaktahi gatihi dukkham. And why? Because they are not even able to transcend their own bodies. Dehavadbhihi avapyate. So if you are interested in seeing everything as formless, you have to be able to transcend your own form first, correct? Mm-hmm. But here there is the body identification, and I'll talk more about that later. Mm-hmm. The body identification has not departed. It is very much still there. The body identification is so rampant, and here the person is saying, I want to, worship the formless. And so the body identification, and by extension, the identification with the mind, the senses, etc., and the identification with all the forms in the universe becomes an impediment to seeking, understanding oneself as the formless, much less worshipping the formless. Yeah. So this we will see, it's a little bit involved. So we'll take a 10-minute break and then we'll come back and then see. So wherever you are, 10-minute break, we will come back and see this verse in detail. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Yeah, this is the time you can also ask questions if you want. I will answer.